The views expressed in this program do not necessarily reflect those of this station.
Welcome to Insights into Northeast Michigan, a WBKB News public affairs program. Insights deals with the issues affecting those in the community as well as Northeast Michigan and the state. And now, Insights into Northeast Michigan.
Hello, and thank you for joining us on this edition of Insights. I'm Kevin Hodge. Tomorrow will mark the end of National Suicide Prevention Month. Joining me today is Mary Crittenden with the Northeast Michigan Mental Health Authority. Mary, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So tell us, how much of a problem is mental health in the United States?
Well, we know it's across the U.S. Specifically, here we see it in Michigan, we see it in our area. There's a lot more awareness with mental health than there used to be, but this is an ongoing project for us that we continue to become more educated about it, we continue to talk about it, we continue to find ways to provide more resources for mental health treatment.
Mm-hmm. And before this interview, we were talking about some blocks that are in place for mental health education. Tell me about these barriers to mental health care.
So some of the barriers we have in mental health care is sometimes there's limited resources depending on where an individual resides. Sometimes it's very challenging to get mental health professionals within available positions. So there's been more of a push for individuals to pursue mental health careers, but there's definitely a shortage across the state of licensed counselors, social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists. So that can definitely be a challenge. For some individuals who live in rural areas, it's a challenge to get to mental health treatment as well.
Mm-hmm. And so with something as suicide, this affects more than just one person. It affects families and friends. So how can you tell if one of your loved ones may be going through something that makes them feel suicidal?
Mm-hmm. So typically we want to look at if there's any changes with an individual. So if we know someone's baseline, how they normally function, how they normally act, how they normally behave, their personalities, and we're seeing changes with that, and especially if that's accompanied by maybe a stressful life circumstance or a significant change in someone's life, we may be able to tell. We can't always tell that. Sometimes it's not always obvious. But if we ever have concerns, we just simply need to ask and be direct with individuals.
Mm-hmm. So would you say that's the most important way to find out if someone is dealing with a situation like this?
Yeah, is by asking them directly. And that can be really uncomfortable for a lot of people. Mental health professionals tend to be very comfortable with it. We have medical professionals who do well assessing for that, becoming more comfortable with that, including that in their evaluations and assessments. We have professionals that are being trained throughout the community to become more comfortable and to be aware of asking for that. But sometimes family, friends, the general community, it can be an uncomfortable conversation for individuals to have, mostly because they're not sure what to do if they get the answer of yes. What are the next steps for them?
Mm-hmm. What makes a person take drastic measures like this to where they might take their own life? What kind of situations arise?
There could be many factors. There could be stressful life circumstances, unexpected situational stressors. There could be chronic physical illnesses. There could be substance use could also be a factor. Mental health diagnoses, untreated mental health could certainly be a factor as well. Unfortunately, individuals who have depression, at any time they could experience suicidal behavior.
Mm-hmm. And depression is one way that someone can be pushed to these limits. What are some of the other cases that you may know?
Regarding mental health, certainly psychosis could be a contributor to that. People who become very overwhelmed with anxiety, that could certainly be a contributor as well. Again, people adjusting to life circumstances, that could certainly be a contributing factor.
Absolutely. And so depressed people, I mean, how often does it evolve into this type of action?
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't really have a clear-cut answer for how frequently somebody who experiences depression may also experience suicidal ideation. However, no individual, age, race, gender, culture is exempt from that, because with depression, suicidal behavior can occur at any time. It's very unpredictable.
Mm-hmm. And so once we are able to diagnose somebody with this, how do we go about treating them?
Yeah, so there's many different treatment options. So it's very individualized depending on the individual. So some individuals benefit from psychotropic medications to help balance chemical imbalances in the brain. Other individuals use that standalone or in conjunction with different psychotherapy. So there's evidence-based practices such as cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, and many others. Some individuals just require psychotherapy. So there's a lot of different treatment individuals can receive. Those are just to name a few.
So Mary, what can you tell me about the suicide rate in the United States?
Yeah. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, also known as the CDC, in 2017, suicide was the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. Specifically for individuals between the ages of 10 and 34, it was the second leading cause. We also know that males are 4 times more likely to die of suicide than females.
So Mary, as we're approaching the end of Suicide Prevention Month, why is it important that we keep talking about these issues?
It's important so we can continue to educate one another on the issues of mental health and suicide prevention. The more we talk about it, the more comfortable we are with it, the more we're aware of available resources, the more we can prevent suicide and provide treatment for individuals who are having mental health symptoms and concerns.
And so what are some of those resources that if someone's struggling with something like this, what can they do?
An individual, there's a lot of different resources and a lot of different starting points. So you can certainly call your local community mental health, specifically in our area. For Alpena, Alcona, Mount Morency, and Presque Isle, it would be Northeast Michigan Community Mental Health. We also offer crisis walk-in hours Monday through Friday. Individuals can also discuss mental health concerns with their primary care physicians. A lot of times, clinics can make referrals to outpatient therapy as well. There's also local private agencies that provide mental health treatment as well. So there's a lot of different starting points. There's also the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. There's also local crisis hotlines as well.
And thanks for joining us, Mary. Now don't go away, because when we come back, we'll tell you how this is affecting veterans. Welcome back to this edition of Insights. Today I'm joined by Greg Simikavich. And Greg, give us a little background of what you do.
Well, I am a mental health social worker for the Department of Veterans Affairs. I am a proud graduate of the University of Michigan. 39 years of experience in the mental health field, the last 10 of which have been with the Department of Veterans Affairs.
And so for this special episode, we are talking about suicide awareness, since we're nearing the end of Suicide Awareness Month. How big of a problem is that in the veteran community?
Well, current estimates are that 20 veterans take their lives every day. To the VA, that's unacceptable, and we've been doing everything that we can to decrease that number, through our programs and services that we offer here at the VA.
And so what is it that brings someone to those levels, veterans specifically?
Well, we see a lot of veterans here who present with diagnoses of PTSD, depression. Sometimes those are complicated by substance abuse problems. And given the types of symptoms that persons with PTSD and depression experience, when that goes untreated, when it goes for a long period of time, each of those conditions can tend to get worse. And as they get worse, people become more hopeless, more helpless, aren't sure what to do. And then that's typically when suicide starts to become a thought, and that's where we hope that it doesn't reach those points, and we hope that they will get here well in advance of it getting to that point.
And so, yes, one of the big problems is PTSD. Can you go in a little more detail about what it is and how it affects them?
Well, PTSD typically is going to be a result of our military men and women's exposure to multiple stressors that they experience while they're deployed. And basically, what develops over time is because as a result of these exposures to these stressors, they will experience feelings of guilt, maybe shame, loss, remorse, anger. These are typical reactions to those stressors, but the problem is that these feelings related to these events will get sometimes stuck. And we are just not designed to carry these feelings and experiences for long periods of time before they start to turn into symptoms. And so in the event of PTSD, we're going to see symptoms like disturbed sleep patterns, nightmares, hyperarousal, hypervigilance, overreactivity to stressors and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And those symptoms as well lead to, unfortunately, social impairments, occupational impairments, and these are men and women who are used to functioning at a very high level of efficiency and effectiveness. And when that begins to wane for these men and women, then it becomes very difficult for them. And so oftentimes they begin to isolate and also begin to suffer, secondary conditions like depression and so forth.
Mm-hmm. And so how can we tell if maybe one of our loved ones may be dealing with something like this?
Well, with PTSD, a lot of times those symptoms are going to be pretty obvious because you're going to see changes in baseline behaviors. And oftentimes what we hear from family members is, my son or daughter, my husband or wife, just isn't the same. So they notice changes in their moods. They notice that they're not sleeping. And we see a lot of veterans and servicemen and women who have very difficult times with their sleep. And that just opens the door to a whole host of issues. They're not going to be as efficient. They're not going to be as effective during the day because of that sleep deprivation. It's going to lead to mood changes. They're going to have difficulty with concentration, motivation. It's hard for them to just sort of get going. And all that results in feeling bad about yourself, knowing deep down inside that you can do better, but you're sort of not. And unfortunately, then that kind of leads to, I think, depressive episodes and oftentimes social isolation, where they feel bad enough that they just kind of stay home.
Mm-hmm. That's kind of my next question. Is it a common thing for veterans to not seek help? Is it kind of the stigma around it?
Unfortunately, I think there is still somewhat of a stigma around mental health and mental illness that exists in our country. I think that we've made vast improvements in removing that stigma. But for some, it's still looked upon as a sign of weakness. And I think especially, for our men and women in the military. I think some are concerned about how that might affect their military career. But what I've witnessed is that the military has made vast changes in the way that they view mental illness and these conditions, because they recognize that a soldier's mental health is just as important as his physical health in terms of carrying out his duties.
Absolutely. Don't go anywhere. We'll have more right when we come back. Welcome back. Greg, tell me about the Veterans Crisis Line.
Well, that is a hotline, basically, that is manned by trained responders to take calls 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. So every day of the year, every hour of the day, they are open to receiving calls from veterans who may find themselves in crisis. They are trained to assess veterans as to whether they are suicidal and the level of risk. And then they also have training in what to do as far as rallying resources to that veteran. That could be anything from connecting them with a VA clinic and getting them the care that they need. It could be making referral to other resources. But that line receives hundreds of thousands of calls. And the nice thing about the Veterans Crisis Line, and a lot of people don't know this, is that family members who are concerned about a veteran being in crisis can also call that number and get assistance. So that number is 1-800-273-8255, and then they press 1 to go directly to someone who's going to be available to talk with them.
Greg, so now let's talk about the treatment for these individuals. What exactly treatment do you provide?
Well, it might be better to talk about maybe how veterans get to those services. Basically, it's going to start with a veteran, applying for services at the VA and getting qualified for services at the VA. And that's a fairly simple process. Once they are approved, they will be set up for an orientation session where during that time they're going to be appraised of the various services that are available through the VA and kind of how to navigate those services. Then they're going to be assigned to a primary care provider. When they come in to see that primary care provider, they're not only going to receive a complete physical examination, but part of that examination is going to include some screenings for depression, PTSD, and things like that. Our primary care providers are highly trained to kind of pick up on if a veteran is struggling in some way, so that even if they don't pass, even if they don't end up being positive on those screens for, say, depression or PTSD, they sort of know what to look for, and the things that, and how the veteran is presenting, the things that they're saying, and so forth. So if the primary care provider feels at all that the veteran needs mental health services, then they're going to decide on what's appropriate in terms of a referral. That may go to a psychiatrist, or it may go to someone like myself, a trained mental health therapist. They will also be assigned a mental health treatment coordinator, and that's usually going to be someone like myself, or if they're only working with psychiatry, it would be the psychiatrist. And their job is to make sure that the veteran is receiving the appropriate level of care. And then that's when we get into the many services that the VA offers to veterans, for treatment of mental health conditions. So that might include just one-on-one therapy with myself. It could include working with a psychiatrist. It could involve a team of people, working with the veteran. It really depends on the severity of the condition that they're presenting with. So, say that we have a case of pretty severe PTSD. We're going to do our best to help that veteran stabilize. And then we will look at possibly engaging them in one of our residential treatment programs, which is a little more intensive, long-term. We might, oftentimes we'll refer them to classes. We have classes that are pretty much educational in nature, about PTSD, anger management, and things like that. We also have these home telehealth programs where it used to be traditionally that they were offered for veterans with physical health concerns like diabetes management, hypertension, things like that. But now we're offering those programs to veterans with anxiety, and we're about to roll a program out for PTSD. And this is where the veteran is at home. He's got a trained nurse that's contacting him on a regular basis and providing him with some tools for self-managing those conditions. We also have something called Video Connect so that despite the VA's efforts to make clinics geographically available to cut down on the driving distance for veterans, we still have veterans living in some pretty isolated areas. We have veterans actually living on some of the islands in the area, on the Great Lakes, because they find solitude there. But it makes it very difficult for them to access services with us, especially in the wintertime. It can become very expensive to get off those islands. So we have a Video Connect system. If they have a smart device, we can have basically face-to-face counseling sessions with them and provide psychiatric services and counseling services and so forth.
Okay, that sounds very helpful, but we are running short on time here, Greg. So what, as a family member, how do we help those we care about? As not trained professionals, but as someone who loves them.
Sure. I think the first place to start is with education. The VA has a lot of online resources that talk about what PTSD is and depression and so forth. And it just can really help, in understanding what's really going on with the veteran. Also, just trying to provide a safe environment for the veteran to talk about, what's going on with him. A lot of veterans are very reluctant to talk about their experiences in the military. Some of that is to sort of protect their family members from the awful things that they experienced. But I've worked with a lot of wives, family members that are very strong and want to know, what happened. And if they still run into some difficulty with getting a veteran maybe to seek care, we actually have a coaching into care program, and this is a phone number that family members can call, and they will talk with somebody who will help them in finding ways to connect that veteran with the VA and with VA resources and so forth.
All right, Greg, thanks so much for joining me today on this intense issue, and thank you for tuning in. Catch us next week for the next edition of Insights.
Insights into Northeast Michigan is produced by WBKB News. If you have any comments, suggestions, or topics you would like to see on a future show, please email WBKB News. This has been a production of Thunder Bay Broadcasting Corporation. All rights reserved.